Part 2. The darkness in the mirrored room was suffocating, and Lydia's breath came in shallow gasps. The voice, cold and sharp, echoed around her, as if the mirrors themselves were speaking. "You shouldn't have come here," it repeated, low and threatening. "Who's there?" Lydia demanded, her voice trembling but firm. She turned in circles, her fractured reflections multiplying endlessly, her face pale and drawn in the dim light. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You don't belong, Miss Harrington. Leave while you still can." Lydia's courage wavered, but she forced herself to focus. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glass encasing the crimson rose. The surface was icy, sending a jolt up her arm. Before she could react further, a light flared behind her. She whirled around to see Damien standing in the doorway, holding a lantern high. His face was a mix of concern and anger. "Lydia, what are you doing here?" he demanded. I saw someone," she stammered, backing away from the pedestal. "I thought it was Charles. He led me here." Damien's jaw tightened. He scanned the room quickly, his gaze lingering on the rose under the glass. "This room shouldn't exist," he muttered, almost to himself. "What do you mean?" Lydia asked, her voice rising with panic. "What is this place?" Damien moved toward her, taking her arm gently but firmly. "Not here. We need to leave. Now." He guided her out of the room and down the corridor, closing the ornate door behind them. Lydia glanced back, half expecting the whisper to follow, but the hallway remained eerily silent. Back in the drawing room, Lady Blackthorne was waiting, her expression stormy. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the tension in her jaw. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded as Damien ushered Lydia into the room. "She found it," Damien said simply, his tone grim. Lady Blackthorne's sharp gaze snapped to Lydia. "The room." Lydia nodded, still shaken. "I didn't mean to." "Enough," Lady Blackthorne interrupted, her voice cold. "This isn't a matter of intent. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I don't understand," Lydia said, her frustration boiling over. "What is that room? Why does it matter?" Lady Blackthorne sighed, her composure faltering for a brief moment. She turned to Damien. "Leave us." Damien hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise?" "I'll handle it," Lady Blackthorne said, her tone brooking no argument. Reluctantly, Damien left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Lady Blackthorne turned back to Lydia, her eyes dark and unreadable. "That room," she began, her voice low, "is the heart of Blackthorne Manor's secrets. It is where my husband spent his final days, unraveling the mystery of our family's curse." "Curse?" Lydia echoed, her pulse quickening. "The Blackthorne name is steeped in blood," Lady Blackthorne said. "For centuries, our family has guarded something powerful. Something many have died for. Charles believed it was tied to that room, and to the rose within it. But he never lived to uncover the truth." Lydia swallowed hard. "Do you think his death wasn't an accident?" "I know it wasn't," Lady Blackthorne said, her voice trembling with anger. "Charles was silenced, just as others have been. And now, it seems, you are caught in the web." The words sent a chill through Lydia. "Why me?" Lady Blackthorne studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps because you are an outsider. Or perhaps because you see what others cannot." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. A maid entered, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. "For you, my lady," the maid said, her voice trembling slightly. Lady Blackthorne waved her away impatiently and handed one of the cups to Lydia. "Drink. You've had a trying evening." Lydia accepted the tea gratefully, the warmth of the porcelain seeping into her cold hands. She took a sip, the bitter liquid soothing her frayed nerves. But as she lowered the cup, she noticed Lady Blackthorne staring at her with a strange intensity. "Is something wrong?" Lydia asked. Lady Blackthorne's face suddenly went pale. "Lydia, stop." "What?" Lydia began, but a sharp pain stabbed through her chest, cutting off her words. Her vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt around her. The cup slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor as she clutched at her throat, gasping for air. "Poison," Lady Blackthorne hissed, rising from her chair and shouting for help. "Someone's poisoned her tea." The next few moments were a haze. Lydia felt hands gripping her shoulders, her body convulsing as the pain intensified. She caught a fleeting glimpse of Damien's face, his expression panicked as he crouched beside her. Stay with me, Lydia, he urged, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. Darkness closed in, pulling her under. When Lydia awoke, she was in her room, the pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains. Her body felt weak, and her throat burned as if she had swallowed fire. Damien was sitting by her bedside, his expression grim. "You're lucky to be alive," he said softly. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Lydia's voice was hoarse as she spoke. "The tea? It was meant to kill you," Damien said. "The doctor said you'll recover, but it was close." Lydia shuddered, her mind reeling. Someone in the manor had tried to kill her, someone who didn't want her uncovering the truth about the rose and the secrets it guarded. She met Damien's gaze, her fear giving way to determination. "This isn't over." "No," Damien agreed, his jaw tightening. "It's just beginning." Lydia recovered slowly, her body still weak but her resolve stronger than ever. As the morning sun cast long shadows across her room, she sat up, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the quilt that covered her. The memory of the poisoned tea lingered, a stark reminder that someone within Blackthorn Manor wanted her silenced. Damien entered, carrying a tray with a simple breakfast. He placed it on the bedside table and sat in the chair beside her. His face, usually calm and unreadable, carried an edge of worry. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle. "Alive," Lydia replied, her voice hoarse. "Thanks to you, apparently." "Don't thank me yet," Damien said, his expression darkening. "We still don't know who did this, or why." Lydia hesitated before asking the question that had haunted her since she woke. "Do you think it was Lady Blackthorn?" Damien stiffened. "No. Evangeline may be ruthless, but she doesn't deal in poison. Besides, she has more to gain by keeping you alive. You're her best chance at unraveling whatever Charles was trying to protect." The answer provided little comfort. If not Lady Blackthorn, then who? The other guests? The staff? Someone unseen, lurking in the shadows? Lydia's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Lady Blackthorn herself, her face composed but her eyes betraying a flicker of concern. She carried a bouquet of white lilies, which she placed on the bedside table without a word. "How are you, Miss Harrington?" she asked, her tone brisk. "I'll survive," Lydia said, "though I can't help but wonder if that's what everyone in this house wants." Lady Blackthorn's gaze sharpened. "If I wanted you dead, Miss Harrington, you'd already be buried in the garden. Do not mistake my intentions. I need you alive, for now." The threat, veiled as it was, sent a shiver down Lydia's spine. Before she could respond, Lady Blackthorn continued. "There's a ball tonight," she said. "A tradition we hold every year to honor Charles's memory. It's the perfect opportunity to observe the others. People reveal their true selves when they believe they're safe behind masks." "A ball?" Lydia asked, incredulous. "After everything that's happened?" "Precisely because of everything that's happened," Lady Blackthorn said. "You'll attend, Miss Harrington. And you'll keep your eyes open." That evening, Blackthorn Manor was transformed. The grand ballroom, with its soaring ceilings and glittering chandeliers, was a vision of opulence. Gold and crimson drapery adorned the walls, and a string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to echo through the very bones of the house. The guests were clad in elaborate costumes and masks, their identities obscured in a swirl of silk, velvet, and lace. Lydia, dressed in a borrowed gown of deep emerald green, felt like an impostor as she descended the grand staircase. Her mask, a delicate creation of black lace and gold filigree, hid her features but did little to calm her nerves. Damien was waiting at the foot of the stairs, dressed in a sharp black suit with a silver mask that framed his piercing gray eyes. He offered his arm, and she took it, her gloved hand trembling slightly. "You look stunning," he said, his voice low. "And you look like trouble," she replied, managing a faint smile. As they entered the ballroom, the weight of 100 masked gazes fell upon them. Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that every person in the room was watching her, their smiles hiding secrets, their laughter masking lies. Lady Blackthorn appeared, resplendent in a gown of midnight blue, her mask adorned with peacock feathers. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her presence commanding. When she reached Lydia and Damien, she gave them a curt nod. "Remember why you're here," she said, her voice low enough for only them to hear. "Watch. Listen. The truth will reveal itself, if you're clever enough to see it." The dance. The night unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Guests twirled across the dance floor, their movements graceful and elegant, their conversations a symphony of half-truths and insinuations. Lydia moved through the crowd, her senses on high alert. She overheard snippets of conversation, fragments of intrigue. Still missing, you know. No one ever found the body. It's cursed, I tell you. The Blackthorn name is a death sentence. And she invited her? Bold move, even for Evangeline. Her path eventually led her to the edge of the ballroom, where a tall man in a silver mask stood alone, sipping a glass of wine. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was sharp, scanning the crowd like a predator. Enjoying the party? Lydia asked, approaching him. He turned to her, his expression unreadable behind the mask. Parties like these are rarely enjoyable, Miss Harrington. But they are enlightening. Lydia stiffened. You know who I am? Of course, he said. Everyone here knows who you are. The outsider. The artist. The woman Lady Blackthorn has placed her hopes in. There was something unsettling about his tone, a subtle mockery that set her on edge. And who are you? She asked. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Someone who appreciates the value of discretion. Before she could press him further, Damien appeared at her side, his presence a welcome relief. Careful, Miss Harrington, he said smoothly. The masks don't always hide what you think they do. The man tipped his glass to Damien, a silent acknowledgement, before melting back into the crowd. A secret revealed. As the evening wore on, Lydia felt the weight of the night pressing down on her. The dance floor seemed to blur, the music taking on a dissonant edge. She was about to excuse herself when a note was pressed into her hand, a simple slip of parchment, folded neatly. She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read the words. Meet me in the garden. Midnight. Come alone. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around the room, searching for the sender, but the sea of masked faces gave nothing away. As the clock struck midnight, Lydia slipped out of the ballroom and into the garden. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of roses. The labyrinth of hedges loomed before her, its twisting paths shrouded in shadow. Hello, she called softly, her voice swallowed by the night. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, their face obscured by a black mask. Lydia's heart leapt as she recognized the silhouette. Damien, she whispered. The figure shook their head. No, the voice replied, low and chilling. But I've been waiting for you. Lydia froze as the figure stepped closer, their presence cloaked in menace. The faint moonlight filtering through the misty garden illuminated the edges of their black mask, which was void of any decoration, a stark contrast to the elaborate disguises of the ballroom. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling but resolute. The figure tilted their head slightly, as though amused by her fear. That depends, they said, their voice low and smooth. Who do you think I am? I think you're someone who knows more than you're willing to admit, Lydia shot back, summoning her courage. The figure chuckled softly, the sound both unsettling and strangely familiar. You're sharper than I expected, Miss Harrington. Perhaps that's why they're so eager to eliminate you. Lydia's blood ran cold. Who's they? What do they want? Instead of answering, the figure extended a hand, offering her a folded piece of parchment. This should answer some of your questions. But I warn you, some truths are better left buried. She hesitated for a moment before taking the note. The figure stepped back into the shadows, their voice a faint whisper as they disappeared. Be careful whom you trust, Miss Harrington. Even the roses have thorns. The letter. Lydia hurried back inside, her heart racing. She locked the door to her room and unfolded the note with trembling hands. The paper was old and brittle, and the ink was faded, as though it had been written long ago. The words sent a chill through her. Lydia. If you are reading this, then I am dead, and the truth remains hidden. Blackthorn Manor is a prison of secrets, and you are now a part of its twisted web. The rose is the key, but beware of those who guard it, they will stop at nothing to protect their lies. Trust no one, not even those who seem to help you. Find the mirror. It reveals all. But be prepared, the truth may destroy you. Charles Blackthorn. Lydia sat back, the letter slipping from her fingers. Charles Blackthorn had written this, somehow knowing that she, a stranger to his world, would one day uncover it. But how? And why? The mention of the mirror echoed in her mind. She had read something about it in the journal she found in the archives. The mirror shows the truth, but only if you ask the right question. Confrontations. The next morning, Lydia sought out Damien. She found him in the library, his expression grim as he examined a cluster of books on the Blackthorne family history. When he saw her approach, he straightened, his eyes scanning her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Maybe I have," Lydia replied, thrusting the letter into his hands. "Read this." Damien's eyes flicked over the words, his brow furrowing with every line. When he finished, he folded the note carefully and handed it back to her. "This changes everything," he said. "If Charles wrote this, then he knew more than we thought." "He mentioned a mirror," Lydia said. "He said it reveals the truth." Damien's expression darkened. "There's a mirror in the East Wing, an old ornate thing that's been part of the manor for generations. It's locked away in one of the unused rooms. Evangeline forbids anyone from going near it." "Then that's where we need to go," Lydia said. "You don't understand," Damien said sharply. "The mirror isn't just locked away, it's protected. Evangeline's had it covered for years. She claims it's cursed, but I've always suspected she's hiding something." "That's all the more reason to see it," Lydia insisted. "If it's the key to understanding what's happening, then we have no choice." Damien hesitated, conflict written across his face. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But we need to be careful. If Evangeline catches us." "She won't," Lydia said, her determination unshakable. The East Wing. That night, Lydia and Damien made their way to the East Wing. The corridor was dark, the air heavy with an almost tangible sense of foreboding. Damien led the way, holding a lantern that cast flickering light on the faded wallpaper and dust-covered furniture. At the end of the hall, they reached a door with a heavy iron lock. Damien produced a key, an old rusted thing that he had clearly procured without Lady Blackthorne's knowledge, and inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in shadows. The air inside was colder, as though the room had been untouched for decades. In the center stood an ornate mirror, its frame carved with intricate patterns of roses and thorns. The glass was covered with a heavy black cloth. "This is it," Damien said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lydia stepped forward, her heart pounding. She reached out and gripped the edge of the cloth, hesitating for just a moment before pulling it away. The mirror was beautiful and haunting, its surface polished to an almost supernatural clarity. As Lydia stared into it, she saw her own reflection, and something else. A shadow moved behind her, though the room was empty. She turned quickly, but there was no one there. "It's just a trick of the light," Damien said, though his tone was unconvincing. Lydia turned back to the mirror, her reflection steady. She remembered the words from Charles's journal, "The mirror shows the truth, but only if you ask the right question." "What do I ask?" she whispered. "Anything," Damien said. "But be careful. Sometimes, the answers aren't what you expect." Lydia hesitated, then leaned closer to the glass. "What happened to Charles Blackthorne?" The mirror rippled, the surface distorting like water. Lydia stepped back, her breath catching as an image began to form. She saw a man, Charles Blackthorne, standing in the garden maze, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. A second figure loomed behind him, their face obscured, but their hands reaching out. There was a struggle, and then Charles fell, disappearing into the shadows of the maze. The image faded, leaving Lydia staring at her own horrified reflection. "Charles didn't fall by accident," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone killed him. And now they're after you," Damien said grimly. Before Lydia could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Someone was coming. "Quick," Damien hissed, grabbing her arm. "We have to go." They fled the room, leaving the mirror's haunting secrets behind as they vanished into the shadows of the East Wing. Lydia and Damien raced down the darkened corridor of the East Wing, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet but their urgency palpable. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and Lydia's heart pounded in her chest. Whoever was coming wasn't just wandering, they were searching. Damien pulled her into a small alcove, pressing a finger to his lips. They stood in tense silence as the footsteps drew closer, the faint light of a lantern spilling into the hall. A shadow passed by, long and distorted, accompanied by the low murmur of a voice. "Are you certain you saw them come this way?" The response was too faint to catch, but the tone was clipped and impatient. Lydia held her breath as the light paused just outside their hiding place. She could see the faint outline of two figures, their shapes unfamiliar. "Keep looking," one of them said, their voice sharper this time. "Lady Blackthorne will not tolerate failure." Damien's jaw tightened, and Lydia's pulse quickened. Lady Blackthorne? Was she behind this? Or were her loyalists acting on their own? The figures moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Damien waited a moment longer before motioning for Lydia to follow. They slipped out of the alcove and took a different route back to the main part of the house, their path winding through corridors Lydia didn't recognize. When they finally stopped in an unused sitting room, Damien locked the door behind them and turned to her, his expression grim. "We're running out of time," he said. "Do you think it was Lady Blackthorne?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. Damien hesitated, his eyes darkening. "I don't know. But someone doesn't want us getting closer to the truth. And now that we've seen what's in the mirror, they'll be even more desperate to stop us." Lydia sank into a worn armchair, her mind racing. The image in the mirror replayed in her thoughts, vivid and haunting. Charles's death hadn't been an accident. Someone had killed him, and now that same someone was hunting her. "What do we do?" she asked. Damien crouched in front of her, his expression intense. "We play their game. But on our terms. An unlikely ally." The next day, Lydia decided to confront Lady Blackthorne directly. Her heart pounded as she entered the drawing room, where the matriarch sat by the fire, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You've been busy, Miss Harrington," Lady Blackthorne said without looking up, her tone cool and detached. "I've received reports of your explorations." Lydia bristled. "Reports? Or orders?" Lady Blackthorne's gaze lifted, sharp and unyielding. "Choose your words carefully." Lydia met her stare, refusing to back down. "I saw what's in the mirror. I know Charles was murdered." The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a moment, Lady Blackthorne's composure faltered, a flicker of pain crossing her face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she said. "Then tell me," Lydia pressed. "Who killed him? And why?" Lady Blackthorne rose, her movements deliberate. She crossed to the window, staring out at the mist-shrouded gardens. "There are forces at play here that you cannot begin to understand," she said. "Charles was trying to protect this family, this house, from something ancient and dangerous. But he paid the price for his curiosity. As will you, if you're not careful." Lydia's frustration boiled over. "I'm tired of riddles and half-truths. If you want my help, you need to tell me the truth. All of it." Lady Blackthorne turned to face her, her expression unreadable. "The rose is not a symbol, Miss Harrington. It is an artifact, a key to something hidden deep within the manor. Charles believed it could end the Blackthorne curse. Others believe it will unleash something far worse." "And you?" Lydia asked. "I believe it must remain hidden," Lady Blackthorne said firmly. "The cost of uncovering it is too great." Lydia's mind raced. The rose was more than just a cryptic motif, it was real, and it was at the center of everything. But Lady Blackthorne's refusal to pursue it left her with more questions than answers. Before Lydia could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices and hurried footsteps drew both women's attention. "What now?" Lady Blackthorne muttered, striding toward the door. Lydia followed, her pulse quickening. A shocking discovery. In the grand foyer, a crowd had gathered, their faces pale and anxious. A maid stood at the center, wringing her hands, her apron stained with dirt. "I found it in the garden," she stammered, her voice trembling. I thought it was just a bundle of clothes, but then I saw." Her words trailed off, and she buried her face in her hands. "What did you find?" Lady Blackthorne demanded, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The maid hesitated, then pointed toward the garden. "By the maze. Near the fountain." Lydia and Damien exchanged a glance before following Lady Blackthorne outside. The mist clung to the ground like a living thing, and the chill in the air felt sharper now. When they reached the fountain, the sight before them made Lydia's stomach churn. A body lay sprawled on the ground, partially hidden by the overgrown hedges. The clothes were familiar, a black suit, the kind worn by the servants of the manor. But it was the face that froze Lydia in her tracks. It was the man who had handed her the note in the garden. "Do you know him?" Damien asked, his voice low. Lydia nodded, her throat dry. "He gave me the letter. The one from Charles." Damien's expression darkened. "Then whoever killed him knows what he gave you. And they're sending a message." Lady Blackthorne knelt beside the body, her face pale but composed. She reached into the man's coat and pulled out a single red rose, its petals stained with blood. "Whoever did this isn't finished," she said quietly. "And if we don't act quickly, neither of you will leave this house alive." The garden was unnervingly silent as the group stared at the lifeless body near the fountain. The blood-streaked rose in Lady Blackthorn's hand seemed to mock them, its deep crimson hue an emblem of danger and betrayal. Lydia's stomach churned as she averted her gaze from the dead man, her thoughts spinning with fear and confusion. "He warned me," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "What do you mean?" Damien asked sharply, stepping closer. "He said I shouldn't trust anyone," Lydia replied, her throat tight. "He gave me the letter from Charles, the one about the mirror. And now he's dead because of it." Lady Blackthorn's expression was unreadable, but her grip on the rose tightened. "This changes everything," she said, her tone measured but heavy with meaning. "Does it?" Damien asked, his voice edged with frustration. "We've known for days that someone's willing to kill to protect these secrets. The question is who? We're running out of time to figure that out," Lady Blackthorn said. "Come with me. There's something I need to show you both." She turned on her heel, her black skirts sweeping through the mist as she strode back toward the manor. Lydia and Damien exchanged a glance before following. "The study." Lady Blackthorn led them to the small secluded study in the east wing, where Charles's journal and other personal items were kept. The room smelled faintly of old paper and wood polish, its dim light casting shadows on the worn bookshelves and the heavy oak desk. "Charles was always meticulous," Lady Blackthorn said, pulling open a drawer and retrieving a bundle of papers. "He left behind more than just his journals. These," she held up the papers, "are fragments of a map. They show a hidden passage that connects the garden maze to a part of the house most people don't know exists." Lydia leaned closer, her pulse quickening as she studied the faded ink. The lines were faint but unmistakable, a labyrinthine path leading to a hidden chamber beneath the manor. "This passage leads to the mirror," Lady Blackthorn continued. "It's how Charles accessed it without anyone knowing." "Why would he need to keep it secret?" Damien asked, frowning. "Because he didn't trust the family," Lady Blackthorn replied. "And with good reason. The Blackthorn legacy is one of treachery and betrayal. Charles believed the mirror held answers that could either save this family or destroy it. But he never found the truth." Lydia felt a shiver run through her. If the passage leads to the mirror, then whoever killed Charles must have known about it. "Exactly," Lady Blackthorn said. "And if we're to survive this, we need to uncover what he found, before they do." The passage. That night, Lydia and Damien returned to the garden maze under the cover of darkness. Lady Blackthorn had given them the map and strict instructions to avoid being seen. The manor's corridors were eerily silent as they slipped outside, the moonlight casting a pale glow over the twisting hedges. The map led them to an overgrown section of the maze near the fountain, where the hedges parted to reveal a narrow, weathered stone staircase leading down into the earth. The air grew colder as they descended, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the damp stone walls. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a narrow corridor lit only by the faint light of Damien's lantern. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, their meanings obscured by time, but the image of roses appeared again and again, their petals curling like flames. "This feels like a tomb," Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. "In a way it is," Damien replied grimly. "Charles spent his last days trying to uncover these secrets. It's fitting that we're walking the same path." They followed the passage until it opened into a small chamber. At its center stood the mirror, its ornate frame gleaming even in the dim light. The glass, now uncovered, seemed to shimmer as though alive, reflecting not just their images but something darker and more unsettling. "We're here," Damien said, his voice low. "Now what?" Lydia stepped closer, her heart pounding. The last time she had seen the mirror, it had shown her the moment of Charles's murder. She had no idea what it might reveal now, but she had to know. She remembered the words from Charles's journal, "The mirror shows the truth, but only if you ask the right question." Taking a deep breath, she spoke aloud. "Who killed Charles Blackthorn?" The mirror's surface rippled, distorting their reflections. Slowly, an image began to take shape. Charles stood in the garden maze, arguing with someone. The figure was cloaked in shadow, their features obscured, but their gestures were sharp and aggressive. As the argument escalated, the shadowy figure pushed Charles backward, and he fell into the darkness. Lydia stared, her breath caught in her throat. "We're so close," she whispered. Damien stepped forward. "Wait, look at the figure's hand." Lydia squinted, and her eyes widened in realization. On the figure's hand was a distinctive ring, a family crest etched into gold. "That's the Blackthorn crest," Damien said, his voice tight. "It's someone in the family," Lydia murmured. Before she could process the revelation, the image in the mirror shifted. This time, it showed the chamber they were standing in, except they weren't alone. A shadow moved at the edge of the glass, creeping closer. "Damien," Lydia said, her voice trembling. "I see it," he replied, turning to face the darkened corridor behind them. The sound of footsteps echoed, growing louder with every passing second. Someone was coming. "We need to go," Damien said, grabbing Lydia's arm. But before they could flee, a voice cut through the darkness. "You should never have come here."